So, you want to hear another story, huh? One where the very fate of Pandora hangs in the balance? If not, too bad, I'm telling you anyway.
On September 18th, 2012, the anticipated and cleverly titled Borderlands 2 released and rocketed the series into the stratosphere. Like most sequels, Borderlands 2 aimed to expound upon the original while fixing some of the problems and adjusting the parts that weren't quite as high of quality as others, and it succeeded to a ludicrous degree. Borderlands had plenty of fans, but Borderlands 2 bred fanatics. There are still people playing the game to this day, some having hardly stopped, and it showed the world just how batshit crazy good a Borderlands game can be. It kept the simplicity of the core game loop while injecting loads of depth, options, replayability, and variety, as well as a much stronger offering of post-launch content. Borderlands 2 improved upon every aspect of its predecessor, but the improvement that is possibly the most critical and influential is in its classes. Borderlands 2 launched with 4 Vault Hunters, with 2 released after launch as their own DLCs, but we'll just lump those in here rather than talking about them individually later on. Each Vault Hunter follows the template set out by the first game, having 1 action skill supported by 3 distinct skill trees, but there is a notable change of focus in their skill structure. Vault Hunters here aren't as restricted in their builds, and there's a great new level of depth for each of the distinct options to build your character around. By the end of Borderlands, 2 players playing the same Vault Hunter ended up with largely the same build. All 3 skill trees completed with all of the good skills, and skipping the gimmick ones that didn't make much sense. By the end of Borderlands 2, those same players could have pretty varied builds that might function similarly in some ways, but have very distinct differences that lead to different approaches to every combat scenario in the game. So first, let's take a look at Axton, the Commando. Axton is to Roland what Borderlands 2 is to Borderlands. His action skill is the same, an automated turret that can be thrown out into the world, but the improvements here over Roland's turret and skill trees are profound. His skill trees are Guerrilla, Gunpowder, and Survival. Guerrilla focuses on aggressive play through buffing Axton and his saber turret. It has skills like decreasing Axton's reload speed, adding rocket salvos onto the turret, and even regenerating Axton's health every time he deals damage to an enemy. Gunpowder, on the other hand, focuses on increasing Axton's capabilities at medium-range engagements, while equipping the saber turret with skills that make it more of a distraction while Axton cleans up the enemies. This tree includes skills like being able to longbow the turret, sending it teleporting to a very far distance away rather than placing it right in front of you, setting off a small nuclear blast when deploying the turret, and buffing pretty much everything to do with gun use, especially assault rifles. Lastly, Survival is all about increasing Axton's defensive stats while maximizing the time you have the saber turret in play. It has skills that let you place the turret on any surface, including walls and ceilings, one that lets you put out 2 saber turrets at once, plenty of health and shield buffs, and a great skill that gives you a small chance to straight up ignore killing damage and healing you half your maximum health when you do. It's easy to see when comparing Axton's kit to Roland's just how much more open and breathable Axton's is. Each tree has an entire build within itself that contextualizes both Axton's play as well as his ability skill without being too restrictive. And you can still combine these skill trees to further tune it how you like, making builds of relying heavily on your turret, or builds using the turret merely as a distraction, or focusing on making yourself an unkillable tank of a man. There's plenty of options to go for, and this is just the first character. Next we'll look at Maya, the Siren. Obviously it's easy to make the same comparison as Axton to Roland from Maya to Lilith, but it is still an accurate one. Sirens are one of the more unique and interesting aspects to Borderlands lore, so it's no surprise that there's almost an obligation for each game to include one as a playable Vault Hunter. Maya's ability is Phase Lock, allowing her to trap an enemy in a large bubble of siren stuff, holding them in place and making them more vulnerable to incoming damage. Maya's skills are split into the trees Motion, Harmony, and Cataclysm. Motion is all about crowd control. It allows Maya's Phase Lock to have a chance to bounce to a new enemy, causes Maya to reflect bullets back at enemies for a short time after killing one, and even allows you to change her Phase Lock into a Brainwash ability that turns her enemies against one another. Then there's her Harmony tree, which is all about healing herself and her teammates, as well as buffing her DPS a bit on the side. It allows her to shoot allies to heal them, regenerates her health over time, and changes her melee attack to instead launch a ball of slag that constantly damages enemies near it. Cataclysm, on the other hand, is for players who just love inflicting elemental effects on others. It adds fire damage to your melee attacks and bullets, summons corrosive rain clouds over enemies as you fire at them, and modifies your Phase Lock to deal slag, electric, and corrosive damage to enemies standing near. These 3 skill trees combine to make a Siren that is infinitely more interesting varied, and fun to play than Lilith, and she's an almost required character when playing co-op because of how well her trees interact with other characters and become so much more powerful when there's other guns by your side to help focus fire on a phase-locked enemy or capitalize on the elemental havoc you're wreaking. Then there's Salvador, the Gunzerker, who is one of the most broken and overpowered Vault Hunters in the entire series. Salvador's action skill is the ability to Gunzerk, meaning shoot with 2 weapons at once for a short period of time. His skills are divided between the 3 trees Gunlust, Rampage, and Brawn. Gunlust tree is unsurprisingly all about guns. It focuses on swapping guns, reloading, and granting Salvador a range of gun-focused abilities. It contains abilities such as reloading all guns not in use when you kill an enemy, boosting damage after swapping weapons, and granting bonus damage to the next shot equal to the excess damage of the shot that killed the previous enemy. Rampage is focused on maintaining your ammunition inventory as well as gunzerking. This tree gives a chance that every shot fired won't consume ammunition, decreases the cooldown of gunzerking every time you shoot an enemy, and even increases your fire rate and reload speed as long as you hold down the trigger while gunzerking. Brawn is all about soaking up damage for allies, utilizing crazy health regeneration along with some physical abilities on the side. It modifies your melee to do more damage and push enemies back, increases damage based on your health, heals you whenever you take damage, and gives Salvador a gunzerking ability that instantly heals him while taunting enemies so that they focus their fire on him. These trees combine to make some of the most ridiculous builds in Borderlands 2. Salvador is infamous for having builds of skills mixed with specific loot that allows him to even one-shot the most difficult raid bosses in the game that usually require a 4-player party a good chunk of time to defeat. Finally, there's Zero, the Assassin. A mysterious figure that communicates only through haikus and emojis projected from its helmet, Zero is a complete mystery of a character. Very little is known about him, even down to whether or not he's even human. His action skill is very similar to Lilith's. He projects a hologram of himself onto the battlefield while the player becomes invisible and can move about the map freely, dealing extra damage on their first hit that brings them out of the mode, with the extra damage increasing the longer that Zero is close. It isn't as much of a get out of jail free card as Lilith's phase walk because you can still take damage, but it does provide a great utility for repositioning or getting out of a shitty situation. His skills are divided into 3 trees: sniping, cunning, and bloodshed. Sniping is another obvious skill tree that covers a lot of the same ground as Mordecai's, increasing sniper rifle damage, critical hit damage, and granting a stackable buff that grants additional damage and critical hit damage whenever you get a critical hit with a sniper. Cunning, on the other hand, is a bit more interesting and provides general buffs to improve Zero's lethality at ranged and melee combat. It allows him to throw kunai knives while in deception, makes his deception hologram explode when he becomes uncloaked, and various other incremental general buffs. Bloodshed is almost the antithesis of sniping as it focuses on buffing Zero's melee capabilities. It allows him to reset his deception whenever he kills an enemy with melee while cloaked, buffs his melee damage in a variety of ways, and allows him to dash in the direction he melees. These 3 skill trees combine to make a variety of builds that are all insanely fun and ridiculously lethal. Zero has a laser focus on making the player feel like a badass ninja, allowing you to do it either from a great distance or up close and personal, ensuring you'll be a crazy killing machine no matter the situation. Then we have the DLC characters, a first for the series. The first DLC character released was Gage, the Mechromancer. Gage is a teenage girl that built a large floating robot known as a Death Trap, and her action skill is summoning Death Trap to fight alongside her. Her skill trees focus primarily on buffing Death Trap in different ways, and her skills are spread across Best Friends Forever, Little Big Trouble, and Ordered Chaos skill trees. Best Friends Forever focuses mostly on survival and aiming. It contains skills that include healing when your gun magazine is full, increases Death Trap's duration and melee damage, as well as yours, whenever you or Death Trap kill an enemy, and even grants a copy of your shield to Death Trap. Her Little Big Trouble skill tree is all about elemental effect damage, especially of the shock variety. It adds a chance for enemies to burst into flames whenever you deal shock damage to them, lets Death Trap shoot out a ball of energy that explodes in shock damage if you shoot it, and allows you to shoot Death Trap with any elemental weapon to charge his melee attacks with that element. Her Ordered Chaos skill tree is all about granting yourself stacks of what's called Anarchy. Anarchy is a stacked modifier that Gage builds whenever she reloads in combat or kills an enemy and gives her increased gun damage but decreases her accuracy. Ordered Chaos increases both the maximum of Anarchy stacks you can have, increases the rate you get them, and gives Death Trap a flurry of melee strikes ability, and changes your melee to base its damage off your stacks of Anarchy. These skill trees combine for a character that has a lot of variety and an action skill that can be as much of a focus of your build as you want it to be. Then there's Krieg, the psycho and personal favorite of mine. Krieg is fan service at its finest, answering the question of what it would be like if the iconic Borderlands psycho was turned into a playable character. Krieg's action skill is Buzzsaw Rampage, an amped up version of Brick's Berserking that allows Krieg to pull out a large buzzsaw and buffs Krieg's melee damage and movement speed. His skills are split into Bloodlust, Mania, and Hellbore. Bloodlust's focus in gun combat and getting stacks of Bloodlust, which increase Krieg's magazine size and weapon swap speed when he deals damage to enemies. Their skills that buff assault rifles and grenade use have Bloodlust stacks increase the duration of Buzzsaw Rampage and blows enemies up with the element type that killed them. Mania focuses on buffing Krieg's melee damage and tanking him up with a handful of health mechanics in a high-risk, high-reward style. It contains some really fun and unique skill, like decreasing ability cooldown when you take damage, with an increased effect when the damage is to your health and not your shield, allows you to instantly revive a downed teammate at the cost of downing yourself, allows you to throw dynamite instead of using a gun while in fight for your life mode, greatly increases melee damage while introducing a 12% chance to hit yourself with your melee, and the absolutely very best, modifying your ability skill to make you become a badass psycho whenever you trigger your ability at or below 30% health, fully healing you, fully recharging your ability, increasing your melee damage, and increasing your damage resistance. It's a skill tree filled with absolute must picks for Krieg that shapes him into an insanely fun and unique character that plays like nothing else in all of Borderlands. Finally, there's Hellborn. Hellborn focuses on elemental damage, especially fire damage, and even more specifically lighting oneself on fire. It holds a variety of skills that increase elemental effect chance as well as the chance to set yourself on fire. It buffs damage reduction while you are on fire, makes Krieg breathe fire instead of his regular melee attack, heals you when you take elemental effect damage, and eventually grants you an ability that shoots out homing balls of fire whenever you take damage and are on fire. These three skill trees combine to make a batshit insane character to play that is full of awesome gameplay situations, powerful synergies, and a whole hell of a lot of visual clutter. The improvements made to the characters are easy to see. There's a great increase to the depth of each character, offering multiple interesting and effective builds where the prior games' characters each only really had one. Borderlands 2 also does a terrific job of building upon the characters that came before, giving fans of those characters a good option to play that builds on their preferred playstyle in interesting and sensical ways. Then there's the characters such as Salvador, Krieg, and Gage, characters that are almost completely new on a conceptual level, reinventing the ways that you can play a Borderlands game and offering even deeper and more complicated options that can be optimized and built in whole new ways to cater to crazy new playstyles. The added depth to the characters not only makes them much more interesting to play, but also adds a great level of replayability since each character's complexity changes the experience of the game to a greater degree. Borderlands 2 also introduced a variety of improvements to the second most important aspect of any Borderlands game, the weapons. Borderlands 2 cranks up the variety of the guns to a ridiculous degree, while buffing both the guns themselves and the brand loyalties to create much more interesting equipment for the players to use that makes combat a lot more enjoyable and patently ridiculous. Further, each brand loyalty is also composed of much more detailed physical components that really help flesh out the manufacturer's identity. Bandit guns are cobbled together with loose components and duct tape, boasting the largest magazine of any of the brands. Dual weapons have sleek, modern military designs of tight magazines and camouflage paint jobs, and changed burst fire modes when you aim down the sight. Hyperion weapons are sleek and futuristic looking to show Hyperion's futuristic set of mind. They're made with mostly yellow and black materials and have the interesting quirk of getting more accurate the longer you fire them. Jacob's guns look largely the same as the first game, having a western style and brown components that can fire as fast as you can pull the trigger. Maliwan weapons have tons of colors and powered lights with cool reload animation with the gun powering down when you reload. The brand loyalty is focused on always having an elemental effect, as well as having the highest elemental effect chance in the game. TDR weapons are modeled after disposable Zippo lighters and are made of gray plastics. Because of this, the guns are disposable, so when you reload them, instead of changing the magazine, you toss the gun away, causing it to explode for damage based on how many bullets remained in the magazine, only to be replaced by a new one teleporting to your hands. Torgue guns are all about explosions. They always deal explosive damage and have high octane race car themed design. Vladof guns are modeled after Soviet Russian aesthetics and are all about high fire rates and automatic weaponry, having the unique barrel type that causes the gun's fire rate to increase the longer you hold down the trigger. These brands, as well as the non-gun making Anshin and Pangolin brands, also have unique bonuses for the shields that they produce. Anshin shields increase the resistance to the last damage they took dynamically. Bandit shields give your melee attack bonus roid damage when they are depleted. Dull shields have a chance to drop boosters that refill your shields when damaged. Hyperion shields can amplify shots fired when the shield is full for insane bonus damage. Maliwan have elemental nova effects that explodes outwards from you when they are depleted. Pangolin have shields that have much higher maximum charge, but decrease your maximum health. Torque shields have explosive novas, and Vladof shields have a chance to absorb bullets that hit your shield, adding them to your ammunition inventory. This increase in detail and variety is especially felt in the legendaries. Legendaries in the original Borderlands felt special and different, but here they are on a whole new level. Even rares can have a crazy number of powerful abilities, and legendaries are especially interesting. The Madhouse assault rifle has a crazy magazine screen size, and its bullets split apart into 2 on impact and ricochet off surfaces, increasing in speed with each ricochet. The Northfleet rocket launcher launches 3 slow-moving rockets at once, surrounding enemies with a pile of boiling plasma on contact. The Conference Call is a Hyperion shotgun that shoots 5 projectiles at once that split into 2 on impact or after going a certain distance, and is so accurate that it can be used as a sniper rifle. The Unkempt Herald is a torque pistol that shoots 7 rockets at once in a horizontal line. And these are just scratching the surface. We haven't even touched the dozens of other visible legendaries or any of the joke weapons. There's an insane amount of variety with multiple great options for every build and playstyle. It is worth pointing out that the gun balancing isn't the best, and it's pretty easy to determine what the best guns are in the endgame, and there's not much of a reason to deviate from those weapons. But if you aren't trying to min-max or run the raids on the highest difficulties, there's a lot of joy to be found in experimenting with different weapons and keeping your engagements fresh, especially as you level up throughout the game and get new options at a fairly steady rate.
I can't just have some psychopathic murderers getting to the vault before I do. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's cute that y'all think you're the heroes of this little adventure, but you're not.
As I said earlier, the story was by far the weakest aspect of Borderlands, so it's no surprise that Gearbox really focused on improving the narrative for the sequel, and they did so with great success. The most obvious benefit from this is the iconic Handsome Jack. Ever since Handsome Jack was introduced to the audience, Borderlands hasn't been able to shake his influence. He's the main villain in Borderlands 2, is both a main character and a playable character of sorts in the pre-sequel, and is a main character in the spin-off Tales from the Borderlands. And when you play through Borderlands 2, it's easy to see why. The Handsome Jack is instantly electric. He's witty, charming, incredibly cruel, but always captivating.
Hey, how did pretzels suck? How's your day been, buddy? We haven't really talked much since I left you for dead. Hey, you think you'll freeze to death out there? Nah, probably not. Bandits will get you first. My day? Been pretty good. Just bought a pony made of diamonds. Yeah, because I'm rich.
Even when he's regulated to disembodied radio chatter that comes over your echo as you play, Damian Clark delivers an amazing performance. His lines and delivery are so gripping that I often found myself stopping in the world to just listen to him talk, not wanting to drown it out with the screams of bandits or rampaging gunfire. The story improves on much more than just the void of an antagonist that was Commander Steel. In Borderlands 2, Pandora feels alive. There's a much larger cast of memorable characters that are each fully fleshed out and realized, and are given enough time to breathe that the players become much more acquainted with them. Not only do the original 4 Vault Hunters all return as NPCs, but Borderlands also introduces players to Ellie, Crazy Earl, Sir Hammerlock, the list goes on. Each character just as memorable and lasting as those before and after them. The story also has real consequences. The good guys make mistakes, form plans, lose, and for some, even die when everything doesn't go according to plan. There's a surprising amount of weight and emotion here that makes the first time playing through a lot more gripping, even if the story goes largely ignored on subsequent playthroughs. Those subsequent playthroughs are largely held up by the humor though. While many out there think that the humor lost some quality between Borderlands and Borderlands 2, I completely disagree. This game is just as funny, if not more so than its predecessor. Not all the jokes land, but not all of the ones in the original did either. And the ratio here is much more in favor of good laughs than missed jokes. Borderlands 2 also makes a litany of smaller improvements that make it much more pleasant to play. At the most basic level is the improvements on how the game feels to play. The controls are much more responsive, and aiming is significantly more gratifying and less floaty. It helps tremendously that a game all about shooting shit in the face made it much more enjoyable to shoot shit in the face. Another is the auto pickup. It may seem insignificant at a glance, but once you don't have to spend a minute or two after every encounter picking up all of the ammunition and money dropped by enemies, you'll quickly realize just how big of a blessing it is. It keeps the game moving quickly, avoids the slog that could be looting in the original Borderlands. There's also the great addition of map variety. No longer will you slog through identical seeming ground environments. Instead, you travel all across the planet. You race over snowy vistas, shoot through trash cities of bandits, run across a mountain range or two, and even terrorize a futuristic Hyperion city. Each section of maps have a distinct feel and visual design to them, not only making it feel like you're actually progressing through a story and world, but also really bringing the world of Pandora to life. Two of the biggest improvements in Borderlands 2 are new mechanics that greatly increase its replayability. The first is the Badass Rank. Badass ranks carry across your entire account and are gained by completing any of the hundreds of challenges that each character can complete. As you accumulate Badass ranks, you're awarded Badass tokens. You can then spend the Badass tokens to give a small percentage increase to 5 randomly selected upgrades from a list containing critical hit damage, elemental effect chance, elemental effect damage, fire rate, gun accuracy, gun damage, grenade damage, maximum health, melee damage, recoil reduction, reload speed, shield capacity, shield recharge delay, or shield recharge rate. The increases are small, but they accumulate quickly as you play through the game multiple times, buffing each of the characters until your invested time gives you a clear advantage when making new characters and leveling them up. It isn't the perfect solution to rewarding players for investing so much time into the game, but it is an elegant way to incentivize the player with something that benefits them across every playthrough. The second big improvement is the revamping of the Vault Hunter mode. In the original Borderlands, beating the game unlocked Vault Hunter mode, a mode where you play through the game but with increased levels to all of the quests and enemies, allowing you to level up a character from the mid-30s most completed the game at, up to the maximum of 50 at the time of launch. In Borderlands 2, this system was expanded to dramatically increase the replayability of the game. Vault Hunter mode is still there, but through DLC there was later added True Vault Hunter mode, unlocked after beating the game in Vault Hunter mode. This True Vault Hunter mode sets all of the enemies to scale to exactly your level, as well as increasing their damage resistance and increasing the effectiveness of slag, a newly introduced element that can inflict enemies with a slag state that makes them more vulnerable to other types of damage. This mode is unrelenting in its difficulty, as you never have a level advantage over your enemies, and slagging even the most common of grunts is an absolute must. Now, this mode was technically a DLC and was bundled with additional levels, allowing you to grind up to level 72, so let's just jump straight into the much improved DLC offerings of Borderlands 2.
A long time ago, there was a big pile of treasure in the desert, and the Vault Hunters found it and killed all the bad guys. The end.
Captain Scarlet and Her Pirate Booty was the first campaign DLC for Borderlands 2, releasing on all platforms on October 16th, 2012. The DLC aims to answer a question that nobody knew they wanted answered. What would pirates look like in the Borderlands universe? The DLC answered the question through a quick storyline, a handful of side quests, and a good smattering of gameplay additions for good measure. It's a relatively short DLC, and of lesser quality than most of those that followed. But first, let's look at the story and the titular Captain Scarlet. When you first start the DLC and sit through the obligatory ramblings of Marcus, you find yourself on the outskirts of Oasis, an amusing small town inhabited by one man, Shade, ripped straight off the cover of Fear and Loathing. The rest of the town is inhabited by the corpses of the ex-citizens of Oasis that all died of dehydration, but have been posed and equipped with speakers and recordings by Shade so that he can believe that he isn't the only man alive in town. It's a dark concept, even for Borderlands, and is quite the introduction. Luckily, in true Borderlands fashion, the dark nature of the setting is counteracted by some really great and witty humor. The recordings that Shade made for each character, accompanied by Shade's description of the characters over your echo recorder, are genuinely funny, despite how they highlight just how deranged and lonely he has become. But Shade is only a momentary side character. After completing a couple of tasks for him, you are sent to find Captain Scarlet, a pirate captain who is trying to find the treasure of the sands. Captain Scarlet elicits the player's help and immediately sends them off to find the 4 pieces of a compass that will guide you and the captain to the lighthouse where the treasure is kept. You collect the 3 pieces that Captain Scarlet did not yet have, she betrays you, you run to a lighthouse, get eaten by a giant sandworm called the Leviathan, find Captain Scarlet is in its stomach, fight her and kill her rake hive pet, but she escapes via teleporter, and then you fight the Leviathan and earn a pyramid covered in loot chests for you to claim. It's a brief DLC with not a lot of memorable moments, but the main quest does its job well enough. The DLC's weak quest writing is also present in the side quests. There are some funny lines with a couple new characters, but the quests are nothing that you haven't seen before. You chase down echoes, race through checkpoints, scavenger hunt in Oasis, and hunt down some uninteresting enemies that are slightly more tough clones of enemies that you have butchered a couple dozens of times over and over. The writing for this DLC is especially weak when it comes to Captain Scarlet herself. When the player first meets her, she is introduced in the most bland Borderlands introduction sequence that I can remember. She talks a little bit of an introduction and then shoots a guy on the ground. It lacks all personality, isn't funny, and she could have been swapped out for any other character in the game and it wouldn't have made a difference. Main Quest also tries to make a joke playing off how obvious it is that she's going to betray you later in the story, even going so far as to have her flavor text tell you that she will, as well as having her repeatedly tease it in her dialogue. The problem here is that it isn't funny. It's something that comes up frequently in self-referential media. The idea that you can have shitty writing as long as you point it out and make a joke about how shitty the writing is. But the problem here is that it's still shitty. These jokes tend to not be funny because all they do is draw your attention to a negative aspect of the media, forcibly reminding you of something that you aren't liking about it, rather than distracting you from it or focusing on what the media is doing well. It's no different here, and by the time you get to the betrayal in the main quest, it is more of a relief just to have it over with than anything surprising or interesting. The writing of Captain Scarlet outside of the betrayal twist is equally weak. She isn't funny, often resorting to making cheap pirate jokes that aren't original and fall completely flat. She isn't interesting, not only because of how projected her character arc is, but also because she boils down to the most basic Borderlands character of an outlaw that is a bit of an asshole who kills indiscriminately. Her visual design is boring, with uncharacteristically poor facial animations, and her visual design doesn't say anything about her character, probably because she doesn't really have much character. Luckily, Captain Scarlet and her pirate booty makes up for its poor, well, just about everything, by bringing some cool other additions. It introduces a new gun rarity called Seraph. It's a pink-colored rarity and fits in between the unique and legendary rarity ranks, introducing guns that have strong stats and abilities, but are balanced with a greatly lowered stat as well, such as accuracy or reload speed. This new rarity level was introduced in conjunction with the new Seraph Guardian system. Seraph Guardians are raid bosses, like Terramorphous the Invincible in the base game, but only including the ones introduced through the DLCs. Captain Scarlet includes 2 new raid bosses, Hyperius the Invincible and Master Guy the Invincible. These Seraph Guardians have a chance to drop Seraph weapons whenever they are killed, and also drop Seraph crystals, which can be spent at Seraph vendors in the DLC hub cities to purchase Seraph weapons. The inclusion helps buff up the endgame of Borderlands 2, providing people who have done everything some new systems and challenges to overcome. This DLC also added some new enemies, the Sandworms, which are fun to fight, but most of the enemies you come across are just reskins of bandits, stalkers, and the like. It's an unimaginative approach that doesn't make the combat feel any different from the rest of the game, which is a problem exacerbated from the mostly bland desert maps. There is one great map located beneath the city of Oasis, which is revealed to be sitting above a large spring of clean drinking water that is fun to explore and has some great visual design to it. But other than that, most of the DLC is spent racing over the open desert plains of Pandora. This is done in the new vehicle type, the Sand Skiff. The Sand Skiff is a bit tough to put a label on. It's fun to drive, including a new turret type, the Harpoon turret, and it really feels like a boat despite it floating above the ground. However, the thing is way too slow for how vast and open the maps are here. It never feels faster than a snail's pace, even when using its boost engines. All in all, Captain Scarlet is a bit of a rough start to the DLC offerings of Borderlands 2. Especially going back after all this time, it was hard to be interested enough to play all the way through it. Knowing just how much better Borderlands content is easily accessible makes this one definitely skippable unless you're doing an absolute completionist run or playing through everything for the first time. There just isn't enough interesting or engaging content here to make it feel worthwhile.
Listen carefully, mouth breathers of the world. This is Patricia Tanis, and I have found another vault. As you may know, the opening of the first vault 5 years ago triggered a chain reaction that revealed more vaults on Pandora.
Ring! You don't want to hear about that, Vault Hunter! You want to hear about loot and packs and explosions!
Mr. Torgue's Campaign of Carnage released on November 20th, 2012, and it is absolute Borderlands bliss. It does almost everything that a Borderlands DLC should do, and it does them extremely well. The maps feel at home in Pandora, but are varied in layout and visual design. The bosses are visually compelling and fun to fight. The quests are varied and just fun. There's new grinds introduced with various rewards and incentives to chase. The dialogue is funny, and the titular new character hilarious and different from anybody else in the series.
The gameplay's pretty dull. It sucked. 6 out of 10. F***ing what? Diamond Mercenaries 2 was awesome! Vault Hunter, find that asshole and kill him because I disagree with his review score!
Campaign of Carnage is a stellar example of how to do a Borderlands expansion, so let's take a look at it. The story of Campaign of Carnage is a simple but effective one. The opening cutscene reveals that Tanis has located a new vault on Pandora, one with a cryptic riddle explaining how to open it. Her broadcast is cut short as it's hijacked by Mr. Torgue, the constantly yelling president and founder of the Torgue Corporation. Mr. Torgue, who we'll talk more about later, tells the player that the new vault will be opened via a badass tournament that is being put on by the Torgue Corporation directly over top the vault. Whomever wins the tournament should solve the riddle and thus open the vault, claiming the mountains of loot held within. From there, the player goes to the badass crater of Badassitude to compete in the tournament with the assistance of Moxie acting as your manager. You enlist Tiny Tina to help you train, and then proceed through a series of boss fights to make your way up the leaderboards to enter the finals and eventually win, opening the vault and claiming the prizes within. Again, it's a very simple plot, but it's one that works exceptionally well. Borderlands has never been a series that has relied too heavily on its story. The story of Borderlands 1 is almost non-existent, while the story for Borderlands 2 is much better, but fans remember the characters and moment-to-moment dialogue much more fondly than the narrative itself. And this is the case here. While the story may not be very complicated or intriguing, the characters and writing that deliver the story are what make it an enjoyable and memorable experience. There's loads of personality in every character here. The 4 bosses that you fight your way through, Pyro Pete, Motor Mama, Flyboy, and Piston, each have a very distinct personality that are each funny in their own ways and have varied memorable boss fights. Each character has a very distinct visual style, as well as lines that are instantly memorable and easily quotable to add to how memorable this expansion is. And none of these new characters are funnier or more memorable than Mr. Torg himself. Mr. Torg quickly became one of my favorite Borderlands icons, and playing through his expansion again after all this time really helped solidify that in my mind. He's constantly hilarious, and a great encapsulation of everything that makes this series so fun and dear to so many people. His over-the-top yelling makes all of his lines funny, especially when combined with his constant swearing being censored by an automatic censoring implant forced on him by the Torg Corporation's PR department. His writing is just brilliant. Over the top, explosive just like his products, but underlined with a surprising positivity to a lot of what he says. Mr. Torg alone sells the expansion. But Campaign of Carnage also excels in its quests. The main quest line is a healthy length with plenty of map variation that takes the player from boss to boss, while the side quests are funny and filled with different objectives to keep things fresh. There's battle challenges that have 3 tiers each and can be grinded alongside side quests that have you destroying vending machines for having oatmeal raisin cookies, hunting a monster truck, finding echoes containing an interview about you, and a new raid boss known as Pete the Invincible. The side quests aren't anything mechanically new, but they do an apt enough job providing varied and humorous context that the quests feel like breaths of fresh air even if they really aren't. Campaign of Carnage also adds a new currency for players to connect called Torg tokens. These tokens are gained through random enemy drops as well as completing the Pete the Invincible raid boss and tier 3 battle challenges. These Torg tokens are then used at various Torg vending machines that are scattered across all of the maps to purchase a handful of new exotics, other weapons, and the DLC specific head customizations for the Vault Hunters. This system is both positive and negative. It's an interesting way to extend the tail of the DLC, as well as giving players a way to simply purchase the exotics that they want. However, the randomness of the rotating inventory of the vending machines almost completely undo those positives. Once a player has grinded out enough Torg tokens to get what they want, it becomes a game of repeatedly loading into an area to check the vending machine for the item until the RNG gods take pity on you. This is made even worse when a legendary or cosmetic head pops up in the vending machine but isn't the one you want, and it also makes visiting the vending machines before you have a good pile of tokens hoarded effectively pointless. There's little reason to spend tokens getting any other items in these machines, so there's no reason to pay any attention to them until you have a small pile of tokens hoarded in the endgame of the DLC. This DLC also carries on the tradition of lackluster new enemy design for Borderlands DLCs. The bosses are each very distinct and great to fight, but the basic enemies are again primarily reskins of enemies from the base game. Bandits and loaders and skags with no real significant mechanical additions that can mix up the flow of combat. The very best Borderlands DLCs are the few that change the combat and make it an integral part of the DLC. It makes the DLC feel different from the rest of the core game and fleshes it out into a real experience rather than just more Borderlands. This is the big negative that keeps Campaign of Carnage from being a contender for the best Borderlands DLC across the entire series. The rest of the pieces are there, but the main combat, what you spend the majority of your playtime engaging with, feels just like regular Borderlands 2. And while that isn't bad, the DLC would be greatly elevated if more of the minions enemies that you fought really embodied the tone and character of the DLC.
Danger! Excitement! Mustaches! It's time for another episode of Vault Hunter Adventures featuring Sir Hammerlock.
Sir Hammerlock's Big Game Hunt released on January 15th, 2013. This one was a bit weird to go back to. I'd played through it before, but for some reason it was always the least memorable of the Borderlands 2 DLCs, despite being of better quality than Captain Scarlet and her pirate booty. So I was really interested to see what I would think of it this time, and if my ranking of it as the second worst Borderlands 2 DLC would change at all. Well, it really did, but it is better than I remembered it being. Big Game Hunt puts the players on a new jungle swamp continent known as Agris, where you aim to help Sir Hammerlock find and hunt some of the most rare creatures on all of Pandora. It's relatively short DLC with only 4 main missions, but what's there is of a pretty solid quality. Shortly after arriving on Agris, the player meets Professor Nakayama, a narcissistic scientist that is obsessed with Handsome Jack and super excited to be facing off against you. You also face off against Nakayama's tribal warriors who worship Claptrap and serve as the main enemies in the game. The story is decently funny, especially Nakayama. His character is a refreshing new type of antagonist, rather than being a boring cliche like Captain Scarlet. He's eclectic, easily excited, and has an embarrassing final boss fight where he dies by falling down the stairs on his way to confront you. Nakayama is a great part of the DLC, although he's so likable and non-threatening that I almost felt bad having to kill him in the end.
Okay, I'm totally terrified right now, but I think I've still got a chance to stop you, Vault Hunter. You may be a walking apocalypse, but I've got my brains, and my guns, and this ship! I may just have a chance again!
Exemplary, Vault Hunter. Now, go collect the fruits of your labors from the terminus.
The biggest standout of Big Game Hunt is Agris itself. The maps are unlike anything else that Borderlands 2 has to offer, bringing excitement to exploring them and making the new adventure really feel like one. This is also true with the new enemies in the DLC. It'd be a shame if a DLC all about hunting rare game didn't provide plenty of rare game to hunt, and luckily this DLC delivers. There's giant spores, huge gaseous plants that flow around above the continent ominously. There's Boroks, dog-like creatures covered in armor plating with multiple jaws. And there's also a plethora of bosses that make up the real big game hunts of Agris. There's Thermitage, Woundspike, Arizona, Bloodtail, Bulstos, Bulwark, Der Monstrositat, Rakanoth, Rogue, Amd, and the raid bosses Dexiduous and Voricidius the Invincible. Each boss is visually unique and interesting, with some cool mechanics for each fight. Of course, the bosses wouldn't be Borderlands bosses if they didn't have good loot to drop. Big Game Hunt offers a handful of new Hammerlock-themed weapons for each of the bosses to drop. The iconic elephant gun returns from Borderlands 1. There's the Damned Cowboy, an assault rifle that has the slow fire rate, damage output, and range of a sniper rifle. There's the Twister, a shotgun that shoots spheres that turn into tornadoes after traveling a certain distance. And there's the Rough Rider, a shield that has 0 shield capacity but increases damage resistances of all types by 20% and increases your maximum health. There's a few others, but these 4 are more than enough to make some really tantalizing loot possibilities, encouraging players to grind the new bosses much more than the 2 previous DLCs. And there really isn't much else to say about Big Game Hunt. It's a fun Borderlands romp with some really cool new enemies and environments, but unless you decide to grind bosses for sweet new loot, it's over before it feels like it really had a chance to begin.
Once upon a time, the Vault Hunters played a game.
The world is on the brink of going boom boom. This is our most desperate hour.
Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep is the magnum opus of all Borderlands DLC. Released on June 25th, 2013, it blew the expected scope of a Borderlands DLC out of the water in a way that hasn't been matched since. Dragon Keep is a brilliant concoction of an open concept, a deep scope, and a creative new direction for the series that allows this DLC to be a Borderlands experience that is unlike anything else offered. Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep isn't just easily the best DLC for the entire series, but it is also likely the best piece of Borderlands content, period. The brilliance of Dragon Keep starts at its concept. This DLC is framed as a campaign run in the D&D-like game Bunkers and Badasses. The game is run by Tiny Tina for the remaining original Vault Hunters Lilith, Mordecai, and Brick. What begins as a lighthearted hangout for friends is eventually revealed to be an emotional coping mechanism for Tiny Tina to try and deal with Roland's death. It's a surprisingly emotional and serious turn for a Borderlands narrative, and packs a serious punch of sadness and empathy for Tiny Tina. As you progress through the story of Dragon Keep, you fight your way through the countless enemies across tons of locations in pursuit of the handsome wizard. As you fight, you repeatedly hope for the help of White Knight Roland, who eventually comes to your side despite Lilith's insistence that Roland is dead and isn't coming back. It's emotionally tough, as Tina is surrounded in blackness and cries about keeping Roland alive through her story, because it's the only way that she can. It's a huge leap up from the storytelling that started in the first game as nothing more than, you're a badass with a gun who wants more guns. Now, I'm a huge D&D fan in real life, but even if you aren't, you have to admit just how well used this concept really is. Any fan of fantasy will find plenty to love here. Dragon Keep takes Borderlands into an entirely new environment that is an exact opposite of its typical science fiction western planet, replacing it with witches, dragons, weeping forests, and tall keeps. It breathes such a breath of fresh air into the game and is the only other DLC thus far that really offers a unique experience since the Zombie Island of Dr. Ned. And this DLC does a great job of translating that unique experience in a way that makes it still feel like true Borderlands while you play it. This feeling is accomplished in a few ways. The first is the world design. The environments here are some of the best in the game. Not only is there more of them than in the other DLCs, but there's a much higher attention to detail and a considerable increase in variety. From the small hamlet of Flamerock Refuge to the dwarven depths of the Mines of Avarice, or to the dungeon fortress of the Lair of Infinite Agony, your surroundings are constantly changing at a healthy rate, each one having its own distinct visual design, its own references to other fantasy properties to discover, and its own slew of enemies to fight that help flesh out its identity in the world. And that's another great selling point of Dragon Keep, the enemies. Instead of simply reskinning the typical fare of Borderlands enemies, Dragon Keep introduces a handful of new ones that are mechanically varied and shake up the flow of combat. There's mimics that ambush you as you greedily try to claim their loot. There's knights that have high armor with small critical weak points and slow but powerful melee attacks. There's dwarves that are slightly shrunken down versions of Salvador and his dual-wielding action skill. And there's golems that are slight reworks of the base game's Goliaths. There are wizards that have different elemental spell loadouts that cast a variety of different hampering effects. That's not even all of them, and that isn't accounting for the different bosses, mini-bosses, or hidden bosses of the DLC, but it's already easy to see that Dragon Keep delivers one of the most diverse and fleshed out catalogs of content out of the DLCs across the entire series. The combat is constantly changing, engaging the player in new ways as you figure out how to best approach each enemy type and really make the world of Dragon Keep stand out as its own entity. The final and perhaps biggest way that Dragon Keep brings its world to life is through the myriad of new loot that it adds. Not only does this DLC add a new purple rarity weapon type, with each manufacturer having their own gemstone variety, it also adds a spread of new weapons, shields, class mods, customization items, and grenades that are all built around the medieval setting. One of the coolest are the grenades that are built around classic fantasy spells. There's a lightning bolt, a fireball, even a fireball that then summons a meteor storm where the grenade made contact, while also refilling your grenade ammo as long as you have it equipped. There's Miss Moxie's Crit, a powerful submachine gun that has a chance to slip out of your hands if you rolled a critical fumble whenever you reload. There's the Seeker Seraph assault rifle that auto-targets enemies for you. And possibly most famous from being featured in the trailer, there's the Sword Splosion.
That gun fires exploding swords!
A shotgun that shoots out flaming swords that explode on impact. And these are just legendary. There's dozens of lower rarity weapons added that each have a cool feel to them as their medieval theming makes them stand out from all of the other guns available anywhere in the series. Supported by some great writing, funny dialogue, fun and varied side quests, a new use for all of your hoarded iridium to get loot shat out by Handsome Jack's pet horse Butt Stallion, as well as the brilliant new chest type where you pay iridium to roll 2 D20s hoping for a high roll for better loot. Tiny Tina's assault on Dragon Keep is easily crowned the best Borderlands DLC, offering an experience that you can't get anywhere else in the gaming industry. It's so clear that the dev team put a lot of passion and love into this expansion. It's truly something special, and if you're going to play Borderlands at all, this DLC is an absolute must. After the release of Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep, and thus the fulfillment of Borderlands 2 Season Pass, Gearbox announced a new form of content releases that they dubbed Headhunter Packs. The idea was a simple one: deliver a handful of smaller, one-zone, themed DLCs that could be either bought separately for a low price or bundled together with a second Season Pass. These packs would be short and sweet, each one offering a short quest line, a new zone to explore, a new boss to grind with some unique loot, and a couple of new character customizations for each character that played into the pack's theme. Each of these packs sold for $2.99 separately, and I'll go over each one briefly, but I've grouped them all together here because they aren't really long enough or significant to each have a longer look at them. The first Headhunter pack was called TK Baja's Bloody Harvest, releasing on October 22nd, 2013. This pack takes you to Hollowed Hollow and is pretty obviously themed around Halloween. In the pack, you do a quick fetch quest, collect candy that drops when you kill enemies and buff your stats like power cells a la General Knox, and fight the Pumpkin Kingpin boss in his pumpkin patch. After killing the Pumpkin Kingpin, you can perform a series of secret tasks to unlock a secret boss, Clark the Combusted Crypt Keeper, who is an interesting boss with a decent legendary rocket launcher drop, but the process to face him is so laborious that it's really only worth doing once. Killing Clark does unlock a cauldron where you can put in a grenade mod, a shield, and a weapon to generate a loot chest, but it isn't definite enough to really be worth all of the effort, as the loot quality that you put in has no effect on the loot quality you get out. The second Headhunter pack is the Horrible Hunter of the Ravenous Wattle Goblin, which released on November 26, 2013 and was themed to fit in with Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving. This pack revolved around the always fabulous Mr. Torg, who hires the Vault Hunters to hunt down an invincible gigantic turkey that he wishes to eat for his Thanksgiving dinner. Across a short mission, the players fight through some kitchens to prepare poison to make the gobbler vulnerable, kill it, and are then paid $1 to listen to Mr. Torg's mom's story. The mission is enjoyable, and the story is funny, especially when you're offered to listen to a second, much longer story in exchange for a legendary Torg rocket launcher afterwards. Then there's the third Headhunter pack, How Marcus Saved Mercenary Day, which released on December 17th, 2013 to tie in with Christmas. After passing through a back door in Marcus's shop to enter a Narnia-esque winter world, the Vault Hunters are tasked with saving the whimsical town of Gingerton from an ever-increasing scourge of snowmen, until they fight their way through to the source of the snowmen uprising, Mr. Tinder Snowflake. It's another very short experience, but the environment is fun enough and the enemies interesting enough that it's a pretty fun romp for how fleeting it is. It provides one of the best bosses in the game for grinding out loot or leveling through Mr. Tinder Snowflake. Releasing on February 11th, 2014, Mad Moxie and the Wedding Day Massacre served as the Valentine's Day Headhunter pack. This pack revolves around the two feuding Irish families, the Hodunk and the Zaffords from the base game. Goliaths from each family are going to be married to bring an end to the feud between the families, but the two Goliaths haven't been able to get along with one another. So Mad Moxie tasks the Vault Hunters with putting together a love potion to take care of things. It's a pretty short and uninteresting Headhunter pack, despite the decent side activity of thresher fishing. The fifth and final Headhunter pack was Sir Hammerlock versus the Son of Cromerax. Released on April 25th, 2014, this final pack was probably the most underwhelming. Feeling like a discount recycling of big game hunt, this pack tasks Vault Hunters with saving Sir Hammerlock after he's kidnapped by the invincible son of Cromerax the Invincible. The environments are uninspired, the enemies generic reused assets and mechanics, and playing through it again now, I couldn't wait for it to be over despite the blessingly short runtime.